with a lot of ideas continuously springing up. It's very impressive, and this is all voluntary work that we have been doing over the past 2 years. So congratulations. I would start with congratulate all the people here that have been from the very beginning and that have joined during the course of actions and are still putting a lot of energy in what we are doing. So let me first introduce my distinguished panelists of today. We will have 2 keynote remarks, first by Katie Brown, who is President and CEO of the Internet Society, then by Jan Droge, who is Director of the EU Commission Broadband Competence Office's Support Facility. I've said everything. Then, there will be myself. I'm Luca Belli. For those who do not know me, I'm a senior researcher and head of internet governance at the Center for Technology and Society at FGV in Rio. Very long name again. Then we will have in alphabetic order Sarbani Belur from the Indian Institute of Technology in Bombay, Peter Bloom from Rhizomatica, who is back there, Natalia Fodic from the American University. Unfortunately, Marina Hernandez could not be here. But Luis, where is Luis? I'm here. Yeah, Luis will substitute her, who is the president of ISO Mexico, Luis Martinez. Then we will have Michael Ogia, who is independent consultant, Carlos Rey Moreno from IPC, and Bruno Viana from Colab. As we have very short time slot, due to an unjustified decision of the MAG that decided to slash the dynamic coalition's slots from 90 to 60 minutes. And by the way, I urge you all to complain with the IGF Secretariat because we have been slashed from 90 to 60 minutes. And it's really unfeasible. Well, it's very challenging to do everything, to present all the work that we have been doing over the year in 60 minutes. The email of the IGF Secretariat is igf@unog.ca. Write them and tell them that we want to have 90 minutes back. So without having introduced the session with these pre-keynote remarks, now we will have the honor of having the keynote remarks from Katie and Jan.
Oh, Luca, thank you. With apologies ahead of time that I've also double booked, but in my view, this is the top of our list at the Internet Society, the top of our list activity that's going on in the community. The actual building and running of these networks by the community, with your expertise, I think has been, for me, one of the highlights of the last number of years, to be able to connect with all of you and to be able to partner with you and support you is what we were born to do. It's been about from the very beginning that the internet has to be for everyone, everywhere. And it's these hard places, at least for the commercial carriers, they tell us how hard it is for them to reach these communities, and you're doing it. And so I have great respect and great admiration for what it is you're doing and how you're doing it. So I think that the purposes are at least threefold. One, to actually organize the communities to enable communities to use the technologies and to run those technologies themselves. So think this capacity building, I hope and I think is part of everyone's business plan. Secondly, to actually get technology up that works for the community. Having visited a couple of these places, for me, it's always the kids that I enjoy watching as they figure out what life online starts to look like and where they can go on this technology. And I hope you all who are busy building this stuff and making sure it's running, just take a look at the faces of people who use it and know that it's a life changer. And then third, to demonstrate, that it's doable, and to figure out what enabling policies, if you will, would help the community's ability to actually do this. Access to spectrum, for instance. The ability to have some backhaul, for instance. The ability for the community actually to, while using the technology to create new markets, to get goods to market, for instance. And so what you're doing is creating the environment for which economic activity happens, as well as personal empowerment. And we are at least talking about with policymakers about this aspect of why indeed it is so important. I had breakfast this morning with the minister from the regulator from Argentina, who you know, is quite interesting to me how quickly even the government guys know in some ways you're getting them off the hook. You know, there's a requirement on the part of public officials to ensure that particularly rural areas and areas of great poverty and need in their cities are serviced, and they frankly don't know how to do it. So it seems to me that the kinds of tools you bring to the table are ones that they need to learn from as well. So there's a partnership here that I see. Some of this is maverick stuff, I know it, and it's fine with me too. But I think also having those people who have control of the stuff, you know, like spectrum, like licenses, like that, to understand the value of this is also quite important. So congratulations. I've seen some of these projects. I know where they are and what you're doing, and I find it exactly right. So thank you for doing the work, and keep doing the work. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Kathy. And actually, I would like to also to highlight that ISOC has always been very supportive, engaged since the very beginning. So it's really excellent to keep on working with you guys. And we have been doing amazing things together, and we hope we will keep on doing even more amazing things. And now, Jan, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Luca. Thanks, first of all, for inviting me to be here and speak. And I cannot but echo what Kathy just said. The objective should be the internet for everyone, everywhere. I think that's the perfect summary. My job, Luca mentioned my very long and boring title, but basically it is to make sure that is also happening in Europe, because it might sound strange, but even in the European Union, there is a huge gap between rural populations and urban populations, with about 80% of urban citizens having access to fast internet in the EU, but only 40% in rural areas. So that's half. So even in the EU, there's a huge gap, and clearly something needs to be done about this. And since many years, we know what some of the barriers might be. They are around access to finance. They are about the legal environment, and I think you just alluded to some of this. But they're also about the technology and the capacity of the people that want to promote these networks to do so. The ones that actually have the demand, how can they take their destiny into their own hand? There are not really easy answers to this, but many good things have been done. And again, I cannot but echo what you just said. Amazing things are happening all over the world, but also in the EU. But it's happening because it's citizens doing it, so it's happening in different little corners, grassroots initiatives. And so the Broadband Competence Office objective is to create a platform, a network to exchange these best practices and learn from each other. And this is basically what the EU has set out to do, and I'm there to animate this network, and we bring together these competence offices from the different countries in the EU, and more we have them also at the regional level, and that's actually one of my objectives for next year, is to go more regional. It's nice to talk to all the countries, and it's great that we have the engagement from all the countries, but in the future we want to go really to the regional level, so we're closer to the end users, if I may say. We've seen quite a few of such community-led initiatives already in the EU. And now our plan is to work closely with an initiative that has been running for over 20 years in the EU, the Network for Rural Development, which brings together basically citizens' initiatives for rural diversification, economic diversification in rural areas. And they've been doing this for many years, but now they realize if we want to continue to keep our villages active and buoyant, we need to connect them. And so we're going to work hand in hand with them to try and achieve this in the next years. Thanks.
Excellent. Thanks, Tian, and thanks also for giving us a lot of hope on what will be done also by prestigious institutions as the European Commission. Actually, that gave me a good leg to start with my very short speech. I hope everyone here amongst the panel, as we are a lot, could stick in 3-4 minutes. I know it's very few, but we will manage to do it. So my work as a researcher is to build the bridge between technology and fundamental rights. And since the very beginning, when I started deal with community networks, I've always thought that they were excellent example of self-determination, of the fundamental right of self-determination. And my chapter in this book is actually on the right to network self-determination, which is something that has not been covered so far, but finds its legal basis on the very consistent body of international human rights law that already exists. The first article of both covenants of human rights is the right to self-determination, and every individual has the right to pursue his economic, social, and cultural development. And the Article 1.3 of both the covenant puts positive obligations on the states that have to make individual enjoy the right to self-determination. Now, what is the link between this and community networks? Well, by constructing network infrastructures, community, they determine their economic, social, cultural development. They simply do that. They simply implement what already exists in the very consistent body of international law. And what I call right to network self-determination is the right to freely associate and define together in a democratic fashion the design, the management, the structure of the network as a common goods, so that everyone can freely seek, impart, and receive information and innovation without restrictions. So it is simply rephrasing what has been drafted 50 or 70 years ago and try to give it a more modern appearance, and you will find out that this is exactly what is already in the international law that we already have, we already used, and that is already binding for governments. A second element that is at the basis of what I call a right of self-determination, of network self-determination, is what in the 80s the German Constitutional Court called informational self-determination. So based on Article 22 of the Universal Declaration on Human Rights, the right to free development of one's personality, and the right to free develop to pursue the free development of of economic and social status, in the 80s, the German Constitutional Court created the right to network self-determination, to informational self-determination, which is the right to every individual to define how their personal data can be collected and used. So what does this has to see with community networks? Well, community networks allow you to build infrastructure, manage it, and control it. In absence of this, of the exercise of this right, well, what is left to the 3 billion people that are still unconnected are policies such as zero-rating services that are based on providing a very limited selection of services that are paid with your data. So in absence of network self-determination, we have digital colonization, which means that the hard choice, due to very unsustainable connectivity policies of the past 20 years, is between doing something ourselves or receiving a selection of services chosen by someone else, paid with our data ad eternum, on which people will have absolute no control. So the fundamental right to control how your data are collected and used, forget about it. the other choice is build your own network. And this is something that, juridically speaking, can be constructed as a fundamental human right. And in my paper, I actually examine 4 different cases of community networks that I will not illustrate because they are already here, but they illustrate how de facto this right already exists even before being consecrated de jure. It means that even without being already in a treaty or in a binding document, people are already exploiting it, are already putting it into practice. And in the second part of my chapter, I speak about the positive externalities of community networks, which is not only connecting people, not only giving access to the internet, but is the generation of a new economic and social ecosystem around connectivity. New services, new applications, new capacity building opportunities, new digital literacy, new social bonds among the community, and new multi-stakeholder partnerships. So I think not only juridically, but also from a very pragmatic point of view, this right already exists, and I think it's a fight that is worth fighting. The consecration of this right in something binding, national policies and international policies, and I will let my fellow panelists explain why it is so important with their concrete examples. So, but first, let's ask Carlos to explain what could be the barriers and the difficulties to implement community networks. So please, Carlos, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Luca. Because I present the 2 papers together, right?
Okay, so I will follow the order of the book. So after the emphasis on how cool could be networks of determination, then we have the problems that we are facing now, and then some suggestion of a research agenda for what we can do in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Luca, and thank you very much for the work of coordinating the Dynamic Coalition and the opportunity to be here, publish the book, and make all this work available to all of you and many other people beyond this room. Well, as you all know, communications and sustainable development have been recognized as one of the contributions to the Sustainable Development Goals. Is very, very clear and has been recognized, for instance, in the Sustainable Development Goal number 9. But what has happened is that for now, until now, everyone thought that, or there was the mobile revolution by which we thought that universal affordable access was going to be achieved, just continuing the model that allowed the mobile network to continue expanding. What happened was that that model is plateauing, and that there is a considerable amount of people that either don't have access to communications or cannot afford accessing communications. In that context, as in other contexts like human rights, as Luca was describing, many of us and many other people outside this room are proposing community networks and local access networks as an alternative paradigm to provide not only connectivity in areas where there is none, but also bringing some of those values that Luca was mentioning. So the paper that I'm presenting here is actually a continuation in a way of a paper that was included in the report last year. Last year I presented a map of community networks in Africa by which we identified 37 community networks in the continent in 12 different countries. But if community networks are recognized as such an important alternative to connectivity, why they are so few? So then I set out to understand why these barriers were. This paper is actually included in this report that was subsidized funded by ISOC, in which it's not only the barriers but the opportunities and the description of what the community networks are doing in Africa. I'm very glad that Josephine and Tato, for instance, are here, and Sol from Sense Learning Network, so 3 representatives of the 10 most active community networks in the continent are here today. And I went through understanding these barriers by interviewing 30 experts and interviewing in depth 10 of the community networks leaders in the country. And the barriers that were identified were along 4 dimensions. The first one, social, and the lack of awareness, not only of the benefits of accessing information, not only not about the internet, but access to information as such. I was this morning in the Dynamic Coalition of Public Libraries, and that was highly emphasized, the value of access to information for the people, but also the awareness that people could actually create networks by themselves. They always leave this for they think that is the government or are the operators, not themselves, who can do it, which is actually part of in the continent, part of the lack of confidence due to generations of colonial ruling, right? And then there are also economic barriers. I don't know if you are aware of this, but in many places where there is, in many places there are not connectivity, but in places where there are, many people are sacrificing on food and basic needs to communicate. In that case, how we need to reconsider that, for instance, the community network model in Europe, where people fund their own infrastructure, can apply in rural and and urban, even Africa. But also, together with that, the power infrastructure is lacking. The import taxes and customs are very high, and the backhaul costs are even higher. All together with the lack of adequate business training is making it difficult for communities to actually tackle these economic barriers. On the technical barriers, we have lack of technical skills. People are not, they don't have the technical skills, as they have other type of problem solving and innovative skills to build their houses, to build the technical skills for many reasons are still lacking. Also, the weather conditions are harder in many of these areas. The heat, the dust, the wind are making that you need more expensive and more rugged devices to be useful here, as it is accessing those devices in the local market, or even the equipment that you need to provide the support infrastructure. But also the technologies that are available, and then that leads to the fourth dimension, doesn't make the scenarios that exist, because there is no spectrum and GSM spectrum for rural communities. You need you are forced to use voice over IP over Wi-Fi, which is possible but not the best solution ever. And the same in places like in Namibia or in Kenya, sorry, in Nigeria. The orography of the place would be much easier to be covered with TV white spaces because there is a lot of trees than with Wi-Fi, but again, we are forced to use Wi-Fi. So then the fourth dimension in terms of barriers are those, right? Are the policy and regulatory framework that are not conducive for rural communities or local access initiatives to actually thrill. It's not only in terms of a spectrum, it's not the right of ways, regulatory capture in terms of big companies appropriating influencing the regulator to actually have regulation and policy that benefits themselves, type approval from other countries, the FCC regulations that actually has had some positive impact in the sense of some of us here with Altermundi and Seleni having created the Libre router, for instance. But anyway, there are barriers that force that side. So, but still, with all these barriers, there are initiatives that have overcome them and that they are thrilling. But these initiatives are happening by a set of factors that make them unique. So we want to analyze them and if successful, understand better those elements that make them successful. So with funding from IDRC, APC in collaboration with ISOC and Rhizomatica is leading a research project to actually try to understand better these elements, right? And in a action research fashion to understand, to act upon the ecosystem and try to see what are the impact of these different initiatives. The project is focused in 4 areas, or we think that we need to tackle all these barriers from an ecosystem approach and 4 areas that interact with each other. The first one is about research, understanding much better the sustainability of long-standing initiatives, and at the same time understanding the unique impacts that this model of communities themselves providing connectivity to themselves beyond access, with a particular emphasis on gender or women participation in these initiatives, is one of the main focus areas. The second one is actually on trying to create a more conducive regulatory environment, from the ITU to the regional associations of regulators to the national regulators, and also create an open data telecoms visualization tool that allows regulators and community networks to know where those infrastructures are available. The fourth activity, and I'm almost about to finish, is about make more people aware that this is possible. And by that, a week ago, we released, for instance, this newsletter that is trying to aggregate all this information. The report will be made available there, as in the Dynamic Coalition mailing list, to aggregate all this information so there is a civil society and a regulator movement that is more informed about what's going on. At the same time, it's about creating synergies between all of us. Try to work together, try to be more efficient with the resources that we have. And then there is a for activity area that is about technology innovation, actually understanding what innovations are are taking place, like the community Wi-Fi that Gifinet is deploying, how that can be, or 3G networks, how those type of technologies can be appropriated and be usable by local communities and rural communities in the Global South. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Carlos. And now we go directly to Peter Bloom for their paper on the TICAC case.
Hello. Thank you, Luca. The book looks great. Congratulations to everybody. So the chapter that I wrote is in conjunction with some collaborators of mine in Mexico, Eric Huerta and Carla Velasco. And basically what we've done in this chapter is adapt a larger document that's a manual that we wrote in both Spanish and English that tries to lay out how we went about creating the first and largest community cellular deployment in Mexico. It's quite a long article compared to some of the other ones, and it really tries to look at some of the different elements and pillars of things that we think are important and that hopefully are applicable to any community network, not just community cellular networks. I want to draw out some of those, and it really has to do with also the way that we think about the work and the way that we try to implement the work in real life. So this is essentially a systematization of those things. So a lot of times when we talk about our work, we think about this triangle of technology, policy, and essentially organizational capacity. And this article lays out kind of how we think about those things. The technological piece is really about how do you reach people in a way that uses devices that they already own in a way that's actually appropriate for folks. So I think there have been many less than stellar and large projects in the past that have sought to create new ways of connecting people, new technologies. We're going to put some new things somewhere. And what we tried to do was to say, let's actually look at what people already have, which are cell phones, some of which are very basic. Those are now becoming, what we call smartphones. But let's start there as a way to begin the connectivity, debate. So that technology needs to be adaptable, needs to be inexpensive, and again, it needs to work with devices that people have. On the political or policy and regulation side, there's a lot to do. I think that's probably one of the hardest things that we have in front of us, and I think what Kathy was speaking to as well, is this issue of there are resources held by governments, also held by companies, that are sometimes not accessible to community networks. Those are things like spectrum, also things like access to fiber, or simply just information about where the fiber is, and some kind of fair pricing mechanism. So if we can't access that type of information or those resources, it's quite difficult for us to think about any kind of connectivity beyond an urban area. So how do community networks, how do small organizations, how do non-traditional actors engage in that process? That's super important. And not just engage in getting information, but actually changing laws where they need to be changed. I think that's a huge piece of this, that it's not just let's work around the edges and work around the corners. Let's really go at the issue and say there are policy and regulatory barriers in place that if they weren't there, or if they were in fact favorable, could really do a huge amount in terms of empowering folks and, as Luca says, help strengthen network sovereignty and network self-determination. And then lastly, it comes down to creating some kind of way to make those networks sustainable. And there's many different ways to do that. There's many different models, many of which are outlined in the book. There's more commons-based models. Ours is more model based on making an inexpensive service that's easy for people to engage with. So In the case of the telephony projects that we have, it's just basically essentially, it's inexpensive, and it's very clear who's in charge of the service, it's very clear who needs to help maintain the service, and there are more collective decisions made when those are necessary, but it's not that everyone all the time always has to be making sure the network works. It's also about being able to delegate responsibilities to people in the community and being clear what their roles are, and that those folks have support. I don't think we can expect everybody, I said this in a session, we can't necessarily expect everybody to become a telecommunications or a software hacker. That's not going to happen. I myself am not one. Nevertheless, everybody has a role to play. But there has to be clear roles and has to be a clear model of sustainability in place that allows the network to have the resources that it needs to continue to function. Again, we see lots of connectivity projects that don't take into account the local community and don't take into account the fact that people are willing, many times, you know, assuming that they are able to participate economically, participate in terms of decision making, and participate in the ongoing maintenance and running of networks. So those are the things I'd like to basically highlight from this chapter. It tries to be as sort of pragmatic as possible, so I hope it's of use, and I hope folks can read it and adapt it to their experience. There's a more detailed version of this online that exists that's maybe like 60 pages. This is about 30 pages that goes into spreadsheets and all kinds of costing and so on. So if that resource is useful for you, that makes us very happy. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Thanks, Peter. And now we go to India. With Sarbani. Oh, sorry. I forgot. I completely forgot that we, before going to India, we have to understand why community network can be a sustainable choice to expand internet access with Michael.
Thanks, Luca. Actually, that's perfect because that perfectly kind of follows up on what Peter's remarks. So, first of all, it's really such an honor for me to be up on this stage right now. The fact is, to all, especially to the people that are community networking professionals, I can't do what you do. So I really want to do my best to support you in other ways. And the way I'm doing that really builds off the work that people like Peter and the ideas that people like Peter and Leandro and Carlos are promoting themselves. For the past year and a couple months, I've been working on the sustainability of the internet because I recognized that, well, it's not very sustainable. And I came to a conclusion at one point, and that is that, you know, we talk about connecting the next billion, for instance, but the fact is we cannot legitimately discuss access without addressing sustainability. Now, I kind of started creating this definition, and I talk about this in the book. I call it sustainable access. And it's basically, I just defined it as the ability for any user to connect to the internet and then stay connected over time. And to me, it seems I hope it's self-evident how community networks are such an important part of that paradigm because, in fact, I think they're a pillar of sustainable access. Now, they're also vital sustainable development, period. And the thing is, aside from providing infrastructure and promoting things like digital literacy skills, ICT skills, technical capacity building, which I know is really integrated into the core of much of the CN models, obviously community networks provide energy. Now, what I found when I was writing this chapter is that while there's definitely a mention of energy in multiple places, and there was a couple resources that explain how to create decentralized energy systems, I would say that especially that the role of energy is largely kind of underemphasized. Now, it should, I guess this is also self-evident, and I definitely don't mean to preach, that power is a prerequisite for energy access, for internet access. And energy and internet go hand in hand. They cannot be decoupled. So the challenge of generating reliable energy to power infrastructure continues to pose a significant barrier, especially to establishing infrastructure, lowering access costs, and the ability to scale. So what is my kind of response to this? Well, the first thing is that sustainability needs to be integrated into the core of ICTs, period. But while this includes network design, I think that community networks can really provide an excellent model to build on, especially for the rest of the community, given that energy is so important to the work that you're doing. Now, aside from promoting decentralized energy systems, which are essentially energy that's off-grid, it's happening where you are, it's solar, it's wind, it's whatever resources that are available. One idea that I propose is also encouraging universal service funds to not just focus on internet and to infrastructure, but also focus on energy. And I found that, for instance, there was a few examples of this, one of which was in Senegal. So the fact is there is a sense of it's been happening before, right? And so I think that that's one way you could do it, but ultimately I think community networks really provide a great model for sustainability, but there's a lot of things that need to continue to happen so that community networks can be and can continue to be sustainable into the future. Thank you.
Okay, so now we can finally go to India with Sarbani.
Yeah, thanks much, Luca, for giving me the opportunity to speak. We are a community-led network at Indian Institute of Technology, Bombay. So this is GramMark project, that rural broadband project at Indian Institute of Technology. I am a senior researcher there at this institute and this project. This project began in the year 2012 with the assessment of TV white spaces in India. And we did some analysis of the TV white space, and we found that most of the the spectrum that is there with the terrestrial broadcaster in India is lying vacant. And so it's like at a time, at a place, it's only 16 megahertz that is being used, and the rest of it, that is 100 megahertz, is completely unutilized, and it's not being used at all. So we thought that we should start using that that part of the spectrum. We approached the Department of Telecommunication, and we got a experimental license for operating, for providing internet connectivity in 7 villages very close by to Mumbai. So imagine Mumbai as a metropolitan city, and say 30 kilometers away from Mumbai, there is no connectivity. So you can imagine that what is the status of connectivity in rural India. So it's like 640,000 villages that have no connectivity, and 50,000 villages out of these even don't have any voice connectivity. So it's a very serious situation there. So we went about with this project in the year 2013 and 2014, wherein we connected 7 villages with the TV white space, and we set up the first TV white space testbed in India. We did an impact assessment study in the year 2014 and 15 on what has been the impact that internet connectivity has brought about to these villages that had absolutely no connectivity. There was no 2G, 3G connectivity at all in these places where we provided the connectivity. And what was astounding is that their lives had really improved in the sense that they had saved on a lot of money, and by not going to the nearby, they had to walk down 20 kilometers or take a bus, and they saved a lot of money, saved a lot of time when the connectivity was provided to the village themselves. So they started using it over there. And so the other thing that was there after the project got over in the year 2014, we got the license was taken back from us. We told the telecom operator who gave us the bandwidth, we told them that, can you please acquire these customers, these people as your customers? There were around 150 people. They said, no, we don't want to acquire them as our customers because the acquisition cost is very high, and it's not a viable thing for us as a private telecom operator. We then thought, how would we do this? That's when the community, they came together and they told that why not we set up a network of our own. We want to set up a network of our own, and you can do the handholding for us. We told them that, okay, we can do this, and therein we wrote the next proposal, and we scaled it up to 25 villages. We again took villages that were completely unconnected. It's in the hilly regions, and it's completely tribal. Some of them are tribal locations. And we provided connectivity over there. So now, what happens is that the thing is that these people are connected now, but then we wanted to understand that this situation that had happened in the first TV whitespace testbed should not happen again. So we thought that we should develop a sustainable economic model wherein the community can actually use the internet, as well as when we go out of the field, when we are we don't have the funds anymore, they can actually run the model, they can run the internet connectivity over there, and then it can just perpetuate itself year after year. So what we thought is that we looked into the different models that are there. It is usually the public-private partnership models, and these models have actually not succeeded in India. So there are various models that are there. So we thought that we should take into account the panchayat, that is the village, the main office, the local self-government's office in the village, that takes the responsibility of owning the network. And we have been doing this. So now our 25 villages is a live network over there, with the communities running the network over there, with the panchayat, that is the village, the local self-government is running the network over there. They purchase for this time it is that we have purchased the bandwidth, but it is after 6 more months, the panchayat, that is the village local self-government, is going to start paying for the bandwidth themselves. So we have got them we got them connected to the telecom operator, and they are going to buy the bandwidth from them. Now, how is it going to perpetuate in the village itself? So therein we have the village level entrepreneurs. So there are some women as village level entrepreneurs, and they are the local youth in the village who are the village level entrepreneurs. They sell the bandwidth inside the village, and they have formed a mesh network, and they are selling the bandwidth inside the village, wherein people are using the internet in the village, as well as they are this is the first time that the business model of the village level entrepreneur is also rolled out in our locations. So but then there are certain things that we are still jostling with. One is the TV whitespace license, because we think that TV whitespace is a very good technology for connecting rural areas of India, because of its propagation characteristics, as well as other things that it can go through very small, it actually doesn't need a line of sight. So this is the technology that we are actually looking at, and we are pressurizing the government. Actually, we are telling the government that they can give us, they can de-license it for the rural remote areas where the telecom operators are not going at all. We do face some of the challenges in field, and that is that one of the important things is the cost. We want to understand that what is a good cost of a technology, which technology is good. So this is something that we are looking at now, and so that's how our network is running. Thanks much.
Thank you very much, Sarbani. And now we change continent and we go to Brazil. So first, maybe it is better if we start first with Bruno to have the description, and then we go to Natalia to have this analysis of the framework. Please go ahead, Bruno.
Thank you, Luca. Thanks for the invitation and organizing the panel and the whole DC3 connectivity group. I'm going to try to be really fast. I know we're running out of time. I'm not going to describe much the article, because it's really, I'm just comparing two community networks installations in Brazil. And every network, every installation is really a new experience with unpredictable facts and events. These are two very different networks. One is a rural environment with like 300 neighbors, there's a local competition from one provider, which was very friendly and cooperative actually. And the other setting is a favela in Rio de Janeiro, with about 200,000 neighbors, so about the size of Geneva, apparently. And there was no way, the plan was never to provide access to everyone, but there's this very interesting group of young people who wanted to have their own network connectivity, and got actually one connection to the backhaul from the university, which is not far from there. But the results were really different, like in the sense that the network in the rural area is completely open, no password, while in the favela they even were afraid of leaving the internet open because there were competitors, local providers which had support or permission from local drug lords, so they didn't want to get into any trouble, so they decided to keep the networks closed with a password and like a more private thing. But with every of these experiences, we get to know a little bit more about how people can access technology, how they can decide, and how to whatever they build, whatever they put together themselves, they can also have the power to decide how to use it, what to use it for, and how to make it sustainable in every case. So I'm gonna keep it there. I'm open for questions in the end, and let's continue with this very rich panel. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bruno. And actually, just a comment on what you were saying, that, I mean, your case studies really demonstrate how empowering can be to the building of community networks for the local community, and giving really different opportunities to youngsters that otherwise would be actually cut off any kind of opportunity in their life.
Yes.
And now we have Natalia to exploring the regulatory frameworks of Brazil.
Thank you, Luca. Thank you also for Isaac for the support, and congratulations for the work. I would like to, in this little piece here that I wrote, for the first time, I shared a really personal story. So for the first time, I shared in public something that happened to my family 6 years ago. In a rural area close to São Paulo city. 3 hours is actually a city that is becoming really touristic. And it was in a rural area. There was a landslide, and basically half of my family died. And at the time, there was no cellular, and one person survived, by the way. So there was no cell phone connection, there was no landline connection, there was no wireless connection, no wireline internet connection at the time. And the only public phone was about like 1 or 2 kilometers from the place, and it was the whole time taken by the media that was covering the incident. So while community networks is not all about connectivity only. It's also about resilience. So I would like to, highlight the aspect of resilience too of these networks, because, this might have been better had we had a connectivity at the time. So I was actually writing this piece from this very same city some months ago. And I was asking around, because now there is connectivity finally, like a really expensive one, wireless connectivity. And the families, generally pretty poor families around there, are paying around $40 to $60 per month to get wireless connectivity. That means about 15 to 20% of the minimum wage in Brazil, which is, a lot of them actually get a minimum wage, right? So that's a lot, and much higher than, the standards set by the Broadband Commission or the Alliance for Affordable Development. That said, I was talking to Bruno today. He said that, when he had a call out for this year for supporting community networks, he had 50 communities interested. That shows like the interest and the demand for that. But just briefly talking about some recent improvements and developments in Brazil's regulatory framework, we have had regulation for restricted radiation since 2008, which means, it has been there for a while. So maybe we should have had more communities right now. By now, we don't have many in Brazil. And recently, the framework was improved so that you don't need a license for operating when you use unlicensed spectrum. And the cost, they also have decreased the costs for that. There was a cost and now there is no cost anymore. However, that said, despite some recent improvements, there is a need to strengthen, especially the spectrum issues. For example, TV white space that was mentioned here by Carlos and Sarbani has been discussed since 2010 in the country and is not yet regulated. And that's like one example of things that could easily have been done but haven't been done yet. So, and then finally, I also briefly describe how important the work of this group is because, the more we have technological development, the more important it is to actually foster what you were describing as self-determination and how these networks can be managed and how these communities can emerge rather than the technology itself, because, now we have many options. And then I also think that the C3 is really important considering the future challenges for spectrum management. For example, with the upcoming new technologies such as IoT or also future pressures that we might face, for example, with technologies that will use licensed and unlicensed spectrum at the same time and might maybe crowd out some of the people that are trying to make uses at a lower scale.
Thank you very much, Natalia, for giving us both an overview of the regulation and sharing this personal event. I think we can now finish with the presentation of the map by Luis Martinez, and then we can have a very brief discussion. Again, it's not our fault if we only have 60 minutes. Complain with the MAG and with the Secretariat. So please, Miguel. Luis, sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Luca. Miguel is okay as well. Well, I'm doing two in one. Maureen is not able to present her paper. And we have been working together since summer, where we were in a meeting sponsored by ISOC in Panama, where we developed the idea that there are so many projects around the world and so many organizations working in community networks that we need to look back, reflect, and look what is everybody doing. So the main aim now is to make a new map of worldwide community networks. Yes, we want to provide a platform to pinpoint every community network that is around the world, but that will be very expensive to do it on visiting all these community networks. So what we plan to do is to provide this open platform using free and open software to the operators, the users of these networks, upload the data that we believe will encompass the knowledge about community networks. This will help, as Carlos was saying, to inspire other projects and maybe do not duplicate the efforts in improving or sustaining these community networks. So we're calling this project the Community Network Atlas. And briefly, the data model that we have developed is composed and inspired by work done previously by Carlos and Michael Graf, with a framework done by Leandro Navarro. Yes, and you will see there is very few academic literature on technicalities and frameworks of community networks. So the set will be demographics, history, localization, architecture, services provided, because we are considering community networks as data voice or radio. Practices such as technical management, governance, neutrality, sustainability, that means money, ecology, yes, and the development of new technologies, and finally the frameworks that will be in the beginning, the regulatory and the legal framework for that particular network. We have a problem with those networks that operate off this legal framework and that can be considered illegal. So those networks, on the request of the people that are providing data, won't be published. Yes, just be taken into account of the statistics that will be provided in an open data. Why? Because people need to communicate. We all need to communicate. It's a universal right for communicate. That's one of the reasons of community networks. And that cannot be substituting our own safety and security. So that's why we're keeping the privacy of those that want to have privacy. And thank you very much. And you're all welcome to provide data.
Excellent. Excellent. And also, I would like to say that we are also launching a survey so that we can merge our efforts to provide more data through more maps and more projects.
Yes.
So, excellent. Excellent. So, well, we are running out of time, but as no one is kicking us out of the room, I propose to have 5 extra minutes for a brief discussion. So, if you have any questions, please raise your hand, and we can discuss together. Don't be shy. Gentleman there and there. Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Thank you. My name is Bengt Borre. I'm from the Swedish regulator, and I'm sorry, but I don't know all your excellent work of the community network. But from my perspective, there has been a lot of communities in Sweden deploying fiber networks, physical fiber networks. People get together in the community and they build it. And interesting enough, what happened after a couple of years is the first generation, the first ambitious people, they leave or they get old, or so I just wonder. And there is issues now to maintain that. So in the different examples, there were some examples that said that how can you maintain that good momentum with these community networks all over the places? What do you think? How can you solve that? Because it's been a challenge, and what happened in Sweden is there's more of commercial players taking over, so that, so to speak, the seller networks, and it becomes part of the larger network because people are not prepared any longer to help out. So I was curious to see if you can give something of long-term development. Thank you.
I propose we take the 3 questions. So yours is on financial sustainability of community networks, and then we provide a turn of reply. Yeah, financial sustainability, let's say sustainability of community networks. The gentleman over there, and then Jan.
Thank you. My name is Tatum Figwe from South Africa, so it's a wireless user group. In South Africa, we've been having some challenges in regard to a release of spectrum for use or by community networks. So I just wanted to get an idea from the panelists. What would be the best approach in terms of approaching government or regulators on the best use of the spectrum for community purposes? Thanks.
Okay, Jan, and then I had someone here. No, Lilian. Who is Lilian? Where is Lilian? No. So, okay, Jan, and then the lady here.
I have a very simple question, but the article on the database that you propose to set up is in Spanish, I think, and it is not immediately visible to me. What will be the website? Is it already working, and how can we connect?
Okay, so the last question, and then we can give a round of reply.
My name is Josephine. I'm an ISOC Ambassador 2017, and I'm also Tunapandanet Community Network. My question goes to Sabani. Did you experience an issue of language barrier, especially in deploying the internet in rural areas? You find that most of the content is in English, and yet rural areas literacy rates are really low. So how would you overcome such a challenge?
Take the other question.
Yeah, well, maybe you can start, as this was directed to you, if you want, and then we can.
So when we deployed the networks, there was no challenge in itself because we did it with the local people, with the local people support. So that was not an issue at all. So language was not a barrier for that because the people. But what you intend to say is that the content after content, the digital content, right? So that is already there in the form of the local language that is already there with the state governments. All the state governments of India have the e-governance programs. That is the government to the villages. It has to go. And this is already there in each state's local language. So that's already there. These people, the villagers, use the internet in the Gram Panchayat office, that is a village office. They use the internet there for their social security card and other things like that. But it is, they actually are not, they don't need to read it over there because there is an operator who is helping. The village level entrepreneur is helping them out over there. So there is assistance over there. But apart from it, the internet that they are using is on the mobile phone. So they are latched onto Facebook, YouTube, and other things. So that's. I hope I answered your question.
Well, as regards sustainability, I can just start giving a brief reply, and then I'm sure the others will give much more elaborated replies. Well, there are a lot of different models. As being a common resource, it's very important to define ground rules. It's a common pool resource. Leandro Navarro and Roger Bayek have worked a lot on governance of community networks and exploring also how the literature by Elinor Ostrom on common pool resources can apply to community networks. It is extremely important to define ground rules on how the common pool resource will be managed and by whom, and how to collect the financial resources to keep on managing it. Many are kick-started with grants and then managed by the local communities, but that has to be defined because otherwise the community network is not sustainable. I'm pretty sure my distinguished friends here will have more replies, so please go ahead and provide your thoughts.
Yeah, I'm just answering the question of the gentleman. Yes, the website will be comnetatlas.info, and we're launching the site on the 1st of January. Yes, and I will be very happy to translate the words of Maureen if you give me 1 week time. And your email, I will do it for you. comnetatlas.info. Thank you.
Maybe Carlos, you're the most appropriate.
Yeah, I think I will take Tato's. Well, Tato, as you know, we did a submission together. I mean, the ISOC chapter, APC, Senseleni, some other civil society actors to the Cost to Communicate parliamentary portfolio last year that I presented to Parliament, and advocating for that. So I think using any sort of mechanism that the government allows to advocate for access to a spectrum to communities need to be used. At the moment, there is the Electronic Communications Act amendment that is looking for submissions that closes on the 31st of January. We are also coordinating different submissions. More than welcome to work on that. I think with the Wireless Open Access Network framework, there are opportunities around reframing that spectrum that is not being used in rural areas. I mean, I've been conducted radio frequency surveys, and there is a spectrum available in the 900 and the 1800 megahertz for GSM, and there is all the digital dividend as well that in rural areas, as you know, I mean, you've been there, how many radio stations are using or how many are using television stations are using any bandwidth. So I think there is an interesting case together with the open data telecom as well, it might be that there is a spectrum indeed non-allocated, not a spectrum that is allocated and haven't been used by the operators, but a small frequency band around 3 megahertz that might have not been allocated. So we are going to continue. We are in that battle, and we are going to. I'm happy to explore with you and with the ISOC chapter a submission for the current call for submissions on the Act.
Okay, I will give the last word to Roger, who has been so kind to wait for his comments until now, and then I think we can wrap up.
No, I just want to comment on the sustainability of these optical fiber communities commented by the Swedish regulator, and it's a good opportunity. We are deploying fiber. And my recommendation is to make, or what our proposal is to deploy the network as a commons. It's already been said. And on top of that, enabling business opportunities. With fiber, we have seen that the CapEx costs are quite high, but the OpEx is rather low. So this means that a single operator operating on top of the community network can have more customers once the network is deployed. For the case of Sweden, I'm not specifically familiar with this, but I can imagine that there could be a small ISPs interested in delivering services there, and the sustainability comes by the aggregation of communities. Here, I just want to make one extra comment, and this also could involve the regulator, to make sure that these assets are made available to these ISPs under the condition that they remain as a common asset. So if anybody else wants to set up or use them for their own businesses, the assets are also available to them. Thank you.
Excellent. So I would like to thank again the panelists, authors, friends, everyone for the great inputs and talks and ideas. And I think now there is a reception downstairs and then dinner somewhere else, so we can keep on talking downstairs with wine.
By the way, I gave my book to Johan from...
You're two philanthropists. Take another one. You deserve it. Ça va? Niels, a Christmas gift for you.
I already sent you.
Yes, and I already replied to you. You were not thinking that I would be so efficient. Yes. Yeah.
This is why you're the boss.
Yeah. No, you are the boss. You should always be the boss.
But let's think about
Yes, with the IGF. Yes. So
let's play a bit
because it's. I think it's actually something that they already have the Gaia working group on this,
yes,
on community networks. But this is something that actually, it's what I was saying before. Is actually it's a juridical way of seeing community networks.
But I think we could expand beyond
yes,
deeper into the network, which may be solving some problem with centralization.
And actually, juridically, there is already a great juridical base.
Discussion on human rights.
I think we can do some really great work. Yes, but only my own constraint that I have at months old.
Oh, wonderful.
Now it's redefining my priorities.
So,
if this play, the next
it can also be done remotely.
Where it is?
It's in London, but you can also talk remotely.
When it is?
March.
I can, maybe it's fair. Maybe it's fair. Let's talk.
Wonderful. That's amazing that you made it so interested in it. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. No, I mean it in a positive way, obviously.
Ça va? Tu rentres à Paris? Ah non, à Marseille, pardon? Finalement, ça va bien marcher le truc avec. Mais non, mais avec le. Comment ça s'appelle? Amnesty International. Ah non, ça marche. Quelqu'un qui avait plus de réseau là. C'est pas plus mal. Voilà. Il faut toujours voir le verbe moitié. Mais. Non, dur évidemment. Ouais, il m'avait dit. Ouais. Et tu t'en vas tout de suite ou... Ah, ok. Alors, ouais, salut.
We didn't even mention that about how the, if you want to, I mean, I talked about cost, but I didn't specifically say that it's not just about cost.
This was fantastic.
It's about also in terms of scaling, the cost of energy itself is prohibitive.
Small but very important. And are you leaving now or?
No, I'm going to.
Let's have a drink.
Good to meet you. Very good.
Thank you for your very good question.
This is because I'm a little bit interested.
I'll be around, so it's a pleasure.
Yes, I mean we are trying to do it to build a movement because there is a lot of very amazing people doing this since maybe 10 or 15 years. But now as the cost of the technical equipment increased and as information has spread, more and more people are doing it.
I was not clear about who's doing the actual physical basic infrastructure. It's assumed you're doing it on top.
But you know, frequently it is wireless infrastructure, so it's much easier than laying fiber. But there are, I mean, the example that I think Jan was speaking about, the bar is in the
UK.
In the UK. And they lay fiber and they have they have higher bandwidth than NASA.
Yeah, but then they had because the capital requirements are so high.
Yeah, that's true. Serious there. But you know, the thing is that if you organize it